Well, hello, everybody. I'm Abby from Drop Biohealth, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event on cultivating psychological flexibility to feel good in your mind and body with Dr. Kaitlin Harkess. Before we start, I wanted to just tell you a little bit more about how we at Drop Biohealth can help you to know your body and own your health. You can connect with our community to understand how committed lifestyle adjustments can improve your health in the long term. You can learn the latest evidence-based health insights brought to you by our network of wellbeing experts, and you can take the wellbeing test to see how your habits impact your health. With only a few drops of blood, the wellbeing test allows you to gain insights and track changes across sleep, stress, energy levels, nutrition and diet, exercise, inflammation, and alcohol consumption. And that's all through a simple at-home test. Don't forget to follow us on our social media channels to keep up to date with our events and health resources, and to join the waitlist to take the wellbeing test when we launch on the 28th of this month. Visit our website at dropbio.com or via the waitlist link that we'll be putting in the chat box. This evening's speaker is the wonderful Dr. Kaitlin Harkess. She's a clinical psychologist and senior yoga instructor who's passionate about supporting individuals to live intentional lives that align with their deepest values. Kaitlin is particularly interested in integrative psychology approaches and has completed published research exploring the psychoneuroimmunological and epigenetic practice of yoga as a tool to support individuals experience chronic stress and symptoms of anxiety and depression. She also hosts the very excellent Wisdom for Wellbeing podcast and has developed a modern psychological course called Yoga Brain 101, where she teaches psychological flexibility skills alongside specially designed mindful movement practices. Impressive stuff. Welcome, Dr. Kaitlin. Thanks so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for hosting me. I'm really excited to get the chance to explore psychological flexibility and the mind-body connection, which I know we're all so passionate about.
We're really excited. We've had a lot of feedback, people really looking forward to this event. So it's wonderful to finally be here tonight. I was really intrigued, Kaitlin, about the Yoga Brain course, which you've offered a discount for tonight's attendees. Can you tell me a little bit more about Yoga Brain and what that entails, that course?
Yeah, so it's an 8-module course that goes through the psychological flexibility skills, which we will be touching upon here tonight as well. And the reason it's called Yoga Brain is that when we're on the mat, when we're moving our bodies, when we're breathing, we can bring in elements that transform not just our physical body, but our emotional body, our brain, essentially our nervous system, which can allow us to step off the mat and into our lives in a more integrated, mindful, and values-directed way. So the intentionality behind Yoga Brain is to teach psychological skills, which we might call psychoeducation, skills that allow individuals to relate to their thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, the pains of being human in a really effective manner that allows them to make moves towards a heartfelt life, towards being the person they want to be. And yoga is such a useful tool and experiential place to really dive into practicing these skills while moving our bodies in a way that's really holistic. So that is Yoga Brain 101. It is ultimately something that's so close to my heart, having moved from being a yoga student to a yoga teacher before I went on to do my psychology training, which was all about the experiences I was having in yoga, actually. So that was, my story and my heart, really.
I love that. It sounds and looks absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing that with everybody. And we look forward to, I look forward to trying it out myself. So we've got a little bit of housekeeping just before we kick off, and we'll get into Kaitlin's presentation. If you have any questions that you'd like to have answered this evening, you can submit them in the chat box and I'll read them out to Kaitlin after her talk this evening. The chat box is on the right side of your screen on a computer, or look for the speech bubble icon at the bottom right on a mobile phone or tablet. And if any of tonight's discussion raises anything for you and you'd like some support, we have listed some services in the chat box also. But for now, let's hear from today's special guest on cultivating psychological flexibility to feel good in your mind and body. Thanks so much, Dr. Kaitlin.
Pleasure. As Abby so kindly introduced, tonight we are talking about cultivating psychological flexibility for the health of your mind and body. I really take to heart the integration of mind and body because ultimately, if our body is not thriving, it's really hard to maintain a healthy sense of mental well-being, and vice versa. When our mind is struggling, when emotionally we're struggling, we're going to be feeling it in our bodies. I like to start things off with a quote. You will hear me repeat this quote a lot, and I don't know who to attribute it to. However, let's dive in with this. Blessed are the flexible, for they shall not be bent out of shape. This quote does not capture the idea that we need to touch our toes. This quote captures the idea that we need to be able to be responsive to the challenges, the stressors, the reroutes that our life will offer us from time to time. And if we are flexible, if we're able to move towards a life that feels really meaningful and intentional for us in a values-directed way, in a flexible way, we're going to ultimately find a sense of thriving in our life, a sense of vitality, a sense that we are living in alignment with who we want to be. So Abby has already so kindly introduced me, and I think when I was sharing about Yoga Brain 101, I did start to share a little bit of my journey. So I am a clinical psychologist and a senior yoga instructor. I actually started yoga when I was doing a philosophy degree. So the context was I was doing a bit of running and my knees were quite sore. I was looking for some organized stretching, and I thought I would try yoga for that purpose. On the other side, I was also going through a number of emotional, psychological challenges at the time. And on the yoga mat, I found these moments of peace, these moments of reprieve from my mind. And I started practicing regularly and saw incredible transformation in my life. However, this was also alongside of a lot of books I was reading, research I was doing around how to navigate the emotional pain I was experiencing. I moved to teach yoga because I thought, well, this is so impactful in my life. I'd love to share this with others. And then when I was teaching yoga, students started sharing their journeys, their transformation with me. And I was really motivated to explore further, going on to do my PhD in clinical psychology, where I actually looked at the benefits of a regular yoga practice for chronic stress and psychological distress. If you haven't heard the term psychological distress before, we're going to dive into that right off the bat. So I would like to introduce you to something. This is the performance distress relationship, the matrix in a lot of ways. We perform really well when we have a little bit of stress in our lives. So when people say that stress is bad, I challenge that, because when we don't have any stress in our lives, we don't perform very well. You've probably had the experience where you've been on holidays and there hasn't been anything scheduled in your calendar, and you have all these good intentions of the things that you were going to get done, and nothing happens. There's not enough pressure to motivate you moving a little bit into the activities that you maybe intended. When there is some stress, some pressure, you can actually do incredible things, because often the things that we care about bring us a degree of stress. And I'm going to call that stress eustress. Eu is the Greek prefix for good. So there is good stress in your life. However, when things start to tip over into a state of distress, that's when you start to experience the symptoms of anxiety and depression. At this point that your performance will actually start to go down. And often when we say stress and we talk about it being an incredibly negative thing, we're actually referring to this, to a state of distress. In terms of what we each find stressful, or what might move us out of this experience of eustress, it's going to be dependent on our resources. So our finances, our family supports, our skills and our ability, all of these things will contribute to our resourcing. And what you find stressful today is not necessarily going to be what you find stressful tomorrow. We can do things to enhance our resourcing. And I believe that some of the things we can be doing are mindful movement practices, physical practices, health practices, skill development in terms of our psychological abilities as well. And this is really important because we know that high levels of stress do make us more vulnerable to clinical levels of anxiety. So this isn't the anxiety that we might have a little bit here and there. This is something that we might term a disorder, something that is impacting multiple domains in our lives. And if we experience clinical levels of anxiety, we are more likely to then experience a depressive episode. So there's a trajectory that happens. And if we can resource you with some of the skills when you're starting to kind of reach that tipping point in terms of psychological distress, we might be able to circumnavigate things getting really tough, really painful in your life. And if you're already experiencing psychological distress, if you're already struggling, let's see if we can offer some skills to help bring things back on track. So when we are moving into a state of stress or distress, something happens. Now, this is in terms of an acute stressor generally. We move into a state of fight, flight, or freeze. This is life-saving. If a tiger is chasing you, you want to get away from that tiger. So you have evolved to have your heart rate start to increase more because you're going to be pumping extra blood to your arms and your legs. You're going to have to breathe quicker to get oxygen into your system for this. Blood is going to be diverted from the front part of your brain that we call the prefrontal cortex. This evolved later. We don't need to be doing higher level math sums or problem solving complex social interactions when there's a tiger coming towards us. That's why when you feel anxious or overwhelmed, you might feel a bit fuzzy and almost get some black spots and certainly have trouble thinking clearly. Also, your tummy is going to be losing its blood as well because getting blood to your digestive system, digesting your lunch when you're about to be lunch, isn't that useful. So that blood is also going to be redirected to your arms and legs, which can leave you trembling a little bit, right? If you're not running, you're trembling because there's so much extra blood in these limbs that gives you that shaky feel. Chances are you know exactly what I'm talking about here. Now, if that tiger is going for, let's say, a gazelle, and it's leaping up to bite the gazelle, what happens? Well, the gazelle collapses to the ground. This is actually our freeze response. Life-saving as well, because if the tiger goes to drag that gazelle off and goes to get its cubs, the gazelle can leap up and run away so its life is spared. If the tiger was going to eat the gazelle, if the gazelle couldn't get away, it's arguably much more pleasant to not be present for that experience of being lunch, to be what we might call dissociated or disconnected, numb. This fight, flight, or freeze response evolved in the context of when we were living in caves and tigers were chasing us, and we still have the same physical experience. Albeit the context is quite different, right? And it doesn't always serve us when we're trying to write a difficult email or make an uncomfortable phone call. Having our heart rate go up higher and our front part of our brain going offline is actually really uncomfortable. And the other thing that happens is our immune system changes. So when you've had a reasonable stressor or experienced stress over a period of time, your immune system actually starts to upregulate. This is because we might assume that if a tiger was going to bite us, chances are we would get an infection because we'd have an open wound, right? It's not a safe situation to be in. We want our immune system to be online because that could save our life if our immune system is ready to go. The challenge is, in today's world, a lot of the stressors we're experiencing are chronic. And in fact, most Australian adults are rating their stress levels as extremely high, and that is pre-COVID data. So we're saying that we're extremely stressed. So our immune systems are flipping on, and as you can see in this picture, kind of going up higher. The challenge is then we can't maintain that level of arousal of immune system functionality for an extended period of time. We essentially burn out, so our immune system drops. When I was studying, I would always get sick after exams. It never failed. And I don't know if you've had a similar experience in your life when perhaps after exams or a really big project at work or a really stressful period in your life, you've gotten sick. And it makes sense because your immune system is kind of nilch. It's burnt out. We can think of this like the boy who cries wolf story. Perhaps you've heard this as well. I was certainly told it growing up. If you haven't heard it, it's the story of a shepherd boy, and he's on the hills. He's watching his flock of sheep, and he gets bored. He heads down to the village and he cries, wolf, wolf. So the villagers come running to help him, and there's no wolf. The next day he goes down and again cries wolf, and the villagers come running and there's no wolf. And then the third day he goes down to the village and he cries wolf, wolf, and no one comes because, he's kind of told them the past couple of days that there was a wolf and there wasn't actually a wolf. The challenge is that there was a wolf that third day. And this is what we're kind of doing to our immune system. When we're operating in this highly aroused zone, when we're very stressed, we're telling our immune system there's a wolf, there's a threat, but there's no threat at that point. And then suddenly, when our immune system turns offline, thinking burnt out, we get sick. So I can explain this in a very complex, ironically simplified description, but I've actually heard some really interesting research that has suggested that if a psychologist shows a picture of a brain or a diagram of a brain, people trust what they're saying more. So who knows, maybe this will increase our trust factor here. What this picture is essentially showing is that there is a complex relationship between a perceived stressor in your life and your brain turning on your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal cortex, which is basically the hormonal system in your body that's activated when you're stressed. So this is where you might hear about cortisol, for instance. That's a common hormone we talk about. Also, your sympathetic nervous system, so that fight, flight, or freeze system is activated. And then we move down to the immune system. So that's depicted in that your immune system has a response when that HPA axis and the sympathetic nervous system are activated. They tell your immune system, come online. Now, your immune system produces something called cytokines. You might know this as inflammation. Interestingly, the inflammation or these inflammatory markers will feed back to your brain that they're floating around in your body. So they're kind of feeding back to your brain, hey, we're online. So your brain interestingly goes, oh, there's an inflammatory response. I need to start scanning my environment to figure out where this stressor is. My body's telling me something's wrong. So we actually become biased to look for stressors in our environment, to look for threats, making us more likely to perceive something that's neutral in a negative light. And we already do that anyways, just so you know, we're also wired to see neutral things in a more negative light because that served us really well when we were surviving. When we thought that there was a shadow and it could be a tiger, we would run back to the cave and be more likely to reproduce and pass on our genes than maybe our other predecessors, or not so much predecessors, who didn't run back to the cave and were eaten for lunch. They didn't pass on their genes. Additionally, one more point here before we move on, is that the cytokines also feed information to your vagus nerve. Now, if you haven't heard of the vagus nerve, it is incredible. It is the biggest nerve in your body. It really tracks down to all of the organs that are impacted by that fight or flight response. The vagus nerve is very linked to your parasympathetic nervous system. If you have strong vagal tone, you can think of vagal tone like muscle tone. So if you have strong muscles, you can do more reps. If you have strong vagal tone, your vagus system can flip you from sympathetic nervous system activity, fight or flight, back into a parasympathetic nervous system state more quickly. So the cytokines send a message to your vagus nerve. You're going to want a strong vagus nerve, and I'm going to lead the way with saying that yoga can help you with that. So yoga is a mindfulness practice. It includes breathing exercises, and of course, it includes, in the Western format, physical activity, physical movement. So in therapeutic interventions and psychologically informed interventions, often we recommend to individuals who are overwhelmed, and really just all of us who are looking to control our stress levels, mindfulness, breathing exercises, and physical activity. They're all anxiolytic and antidepressant, which is basically to say they help us navigate the challenges, the stressors that come with this modern world. So yoga is really useful in that domain. And additionally, yoga can influence a number of systems in your body. So in addition to enhancing your mood and helping you manage stressors and manage levels of anxiety, it's also really useful for individuals who might be experiencing chronic pain, cardiovascular conditions, so heart conditions, autoimmune conditions, and immune conditions, which makes sense when we look at that map that depicted the relationship of our stress system with our immune system. So the way that yoga might support you then to navigate or mitigate some of the stresses in your life is enhancing that vagus tone. So by moving our body, by moving, contracting, stretching, we're moving our body in such a way that we're touching upon our vagus nerve, remembering that it's so big and it affects all of these areas in our body. All the contraction and expansion can help us strengthen it, which doesn't mean that you're not going to get stressed in your life, but it means that with that strong vagal tone, you can flip back into a parasympathetic nervous system state. So calm yourself, move back into a place of rest and digest more quickly, more easily. There's also been some research that suggested that yoga has changed some of the neurotransmitters in our brain. Well, enhanced, I suppose, is the right word. GABA, for instance, which is anxiolytic, that just means that it decreases the level of anxiety we're experiencing, has been found to increase through the practice of yoga, which is pretty incredible. So if you're kind of wondering, well, how does this work? There's a number of pathways. And then to dive deeper into epigenetics, epi means on top of. So there was a lot of research back in the 90s around the human genome, and it turned out we didn't know that much about who would get illness or not from our genome. Our epigenome, however, essentially tells our genome or our body which cells to turn on or off. So you think of it like a tap. If we turn the tap on, certain cells, certain diseases or health might be turned on. If we turn it off, maybe the opposite. It's much more complex, and there'll be a variety of genes that are interconnected in this experience. But in the simplest conceptualization, think if you can turn on cells that are related to health, to well-being, that's what you want to do. And you want to turn off cells and those that represent illness or ill health. So through the practice of yoga, and truthfully, through the practice of any physical activity, health behaviors, we are seeing changes at the epigenomic level, which means that you are telling your body to produce different cells, to produce elements, physical elements in your being that are related to your health and well-being. This is incredibly, I think, powerful, because when we can get down to the nitty-gritty and actually measure transformation that's happening in our bodies, that's really the gold standard in terms of understanding mechanisms and benefit. It's not just that we think we're having a better time with stress, we're actually seeing our physiological system is in fact transforming. And how cool that in the course of your lifetime, through health and well-being practices, that you can actually transform how you are traveling and the cells that you're going to be passing then down to your offspring. It's pretty cool. So it is all connected. Your physical health, your psychological health, everything is bi-directional. When you enhance your physical body, you enhance your mental body, and vice versa. So with that in mind, I would at this point like to introduce you to the concept of psychological flexibility. So psychological flexibility basically means your ability to act in alignment with your values, with the things that you choose as important in your life and your long-term goals, even when you're experiencing discomfort and pain. So difficult thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations, distress. Being able to hold space for those and make moves that take you where you want to go. This is psychological flexibility. And you can think of it as having 3 pillars. Now, just like a house that's balanced on 3 pillars is going to collapse if one pillar is removed, we need all 3. Awareness, openness, and engagement are the pillars. Often, I like to start by explaining awareness. Awareness is really crucial in being able to open to experiences that are in our lives. We have to know what these experiences are, and then to engage, to move forward and live a vital and meaningful life. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to spend the next little while diving into these 3 pillars, and then I'll make sure that we leave some time at the end for questions. So if you do have any questions around yoga or the psychological flexibility pillars, we can dive into those. So awareness essentially means to be here now. There are 2 components to awareness: present moment connection and your observing self. Now, what is present moment connection? Present moment connection is essentially the ability to notice what's happening internally and externally. So we can be really connected to the present moment without being flexible. If you play video games, or if you know a teenager who does, you have seen someone who is super in the moment, but they become hyper-focused, and dinner might be called, they might even be hungry, and they don't notice because they're so streamlined in that moment. So hyper-focus isn't what we're going for here. And similarly, someone can be really flexible in their attention, but isn't able to maintain attention on anything that they want to. So this is why present moment connection or mindfulness skills are so useful. Mindfulness is essentially just teaching us, training us. It's like doing reps at the gym, so that we can be aware of what's happening for us in the present moment and choose where we might want to direct our attention, where we might want to focus in our lives. The observing self is a really interesting concept, and I have to admit, this is a little bit of a passion area for me, because I think we get taught a lot in our society that we are our thoughts or our feelings or our emotional experiences. We also get taught to fear these experiences. So if I can give you a real linguistic example, if I say to you, I am anxious, or I am stupid, it's making this real connection of me and that experience. So if I am anxious, I'm really fused with that concept. If I am stupid, I'm really fused with that concept, with that thought. If I was to change my languaging to practice diffusion, which we're actually going to talk more about in the next slide, I might step back into saying, oh, like I'm noticing I'm feeling anxious, or I'm having the thought that I'm stupid. It doesn't seem so intense, does it? So there's this stepping back into noticing these experiences. But who is then noticing your thoughts or noticing your feelings? This is your observing self. So there's a thinking self and there's an observing self. And we might think of your observing self as the sky. Everything else is just weather, as Pema Chodron says. What I mean by that is that if you are the sky, you can witness thunder showers, you can witness blizzards, tornadoes, as well as rainbows and sunny days. You are just the space holder of those experiences. You are not those experiences. If you can step back behind the weather and move into this state of skyness, so to speak, how powerful. How powerful for you to simply bear witness to your thoughts, your feelings, and not to have to be those really painful ones. So openness then means being open to those experiences. learning to actually step back into that sky-like state, to diffuse, as we just talked about, from painful thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations, to witness them as passing events. Your thoughts as just thoughts, products of a mind that thinks. And then be willing to have those experiences, to practice acceptance, non-judgmental awareness. Acceptance is something that I think we can sometimes assume means that we're okay with something that's happening, or that we want it or will it, or that we're resigning ourselves. Acceptance doesn't mean that we agree with something, that we necessarily forgive a behavior, or we want or will something. It simply means accepting things as they are. And there is a fairly famous quote that I will paraphrase, and it goes something like this. When I accept myself as I am, paradoxically, I have the power to change. So when we accept ourselves as we are, all of the challenges that come with being human, the imperfections, us, as human beings being perfectly imperfect, when we accept where we're at right now, our struggles, our challenges, we can choose a way forward. And similarly, when we accept our environment, what's happening in our lives, our stressors, our current resources as they are, rather than battling with them and investing a lot of time and energy into willing them to be different, when we accept them just as they are, we can turn that energy towards actions and behaviors that will take us towards a life that is meaningful and that is purposeful. I don't have a monster up on the screen right now, but I will get you to imagine one, because I'll actually give you a bit of a metaphor that I like to think of. So if I am in a tug of war with a monster, I am holding a rope and a monster is holding the other side of the rope, and I do not like this monster. This is a horribly scary monster, and I do not want it here. I want it to be gone. There's a ditch between the monster and I want to get that monster in the ditch. Now, if I pull a little, the monster is going to pull a lot. And I'm going to pull a little bit further, and the monster is going to pull more. And we're going to go back and forth until I'm no longer looking at you. All of my energy is in this tug of war with the monster, and I am exhausted, but I want it gone so bad. I want it in the ditch. I really have no choice, arguably, at this point, but to continue with this path, this pull, for forever, for the conceivable future, or to try something different, perhaps letting go of the rope. And while the monster is still there and it's scary and I don't particularly like it, I can engage with you. My hands are free. My energy is free. This is what acceptance is all about. It's about dropping the rope, accepting that there are difficult things in our lives, that there are painful thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations that are going to come up from time to time, and perhaps regularly. And rather than battling with them, we can diffuse. We can recognize our monsters for what they are. We can accept that they're there, and we can orientate towards a life that is meaningful, that is purposeful, and that is valuable for us. So this is where the third step comes in. This is where I would like to talk about engagement. This is, I think, where I would like, if it's okay with you, to spend most of our time tonight, because what we want to do is figure out how we step forward into a life that is meaningful and purposeful for us. And I would like to suggest bringing yoga along for the ride. So in terms of engagement, we need to know what our values are. If you have around you a phone, a piece of paper, even your notes in your phone, could you maybe just make a note of some of the things that are important for you? What are the things that really light you up? What are the things that you would like to stand for in your life? Who are the people that are important? Because if we can get clear on your values, on your why, essentially, we're going to know the goals to formulate. We're going to know what purposeful action looks like for you. So in terms of some common values that people might have, you're going to have your own unique ones, but, compassion, patience, curiosity, adventure, learning. Perhaps you're here because you really value health of body, of mind. What are the things that are important for you? And let's say that you don't actually value health. Let's say that you don't, give two hoots about the health of your body and your physical functioning. If you value your kids, if you value your partner, your family, your friends, your work that you do, I wonder how that can be impacted when our health is struggling, right? It's really hard to be patient if we're really uncomfortable. It's really hard to be really connected, focused, and present with someone when we are aching in body or in mind. So being able to cultivate health and well-being of mind and body, I believe, impacts every other area of our life for the most part. And even things like present moment awareness, one of those skills of psychological flexibility that we bolster through mindfulness. As we bolster that, we cultivate a stronger attentional muscle. And just like as we strengthen our vagus tone to help us pull back into parasympathetic nervous system activity, if we're strengthening our muscle of attention, we can focus more at work. We can be more present with our loved ones, with the people we care about. So if you're having trouble thinking of your values, I'll just give you a couple of ways in. Have a think of the moments in your life that are super sweet, like really delightful moments where you feel real peace or joy. For me, when I'm really present with my little ones, that can be a really sweet moment for me. Seeing them light up and being in that moment is really delightful. And sometimes that brings me back into the present moment when everything else is going on in my mind. I also really love nature, and I particularly love the sensation of taking my shoes off and being out in nature and kind of feeling that. That really connects me to the moment. It feels really sweet and powerful for me. And maybe you have unique experiences. Maybe it is as you're planning a trip. Maybe it says you're hashing a big project out in your mind and it feels really exciting. There might be a sense of timelessness to some of these experiences. And the other way in is to think of your pains. What hurts in your life? Where do you experience suffering? Because the fact is you hurt where you care. If, for instance, going out to meet some friends or going to a networking event feels really uncomfortable for you, it's likely because you care about the social connections, about cultivating new relationships. If you didn't care, you wouldn't experience that anxiety or that pain or that grief. It's two sides of a coin. When we do care about something, we are definitely at risk of experiencing pain. And that's kind of the beauty of a life well lived, isn't it? That if we have the flexibility skills, the resilience to hold the pain and to know that we'll be okay, we can move forward to the things that we care about. Because there's two types of pain. There's the pain of perhaps the anxiety that might come with going out to a networking event or letting go of a project to reorientate to family or people that need you. And then there's the pain of absence, of not having those things in your life. And are you willing to hold that pain of absence, of things missing from your life, to avoid some of the discomfort of doing activities that are meaningful and important to you, of doing the things you care about? Because then if we move on to the next stage of engagement, this is purposeful action, being really deliberate in how you show up in your life so that you can show up in alignment with your values. And there are going to be big goals in your life, things that you're really working towards. You can think if your values are your compass and they're pointing you north, there are going to be markers along the way north, and these might be your goals. In the case of a map, if we're going north, you might see a river or a lake or a mountain. And you know that if you get over the river, if you swim through the lake, those are your goals. But if you can't swim through the lake because it's a thunder shower and there's lightning and it's no longer safe to swim in water, and you walk around the lake, that's going to be okay because you know the purpose is that you're going north. It's not going to be so disheartening versus if you thought the only intention of going across the lake was for the purpose of going across the lake. Also, if the water was cold and your only reason for going across the lake was just to go across the lake, I wonder if you might be easily dissuaded from that intentionality of swimming across the lake because it has no greater meaning. If you know it's so that you can go north, you might be more willing to withstand that cold. So let's get clear on your values, and then let's get clear on what it means to take action towards those values. Big goals, medium-sized goals, short-term goals, and routine. So I'm going to suggest that maybe yoga can help you regularly show up as the person you want to be. And maybe it can be a tool to assist you as you move forward to create, the person you want to be and to live and action those big goals. So what I mean by this is if you are getting onto your yoga mat regularly, if you are moving and breathing and practicing presence, do you think it's going to be easier to maintain your focus at work, to reach that next milestone? Do you think it's going to be easier to be present with your kids if you can maintain your focus? Do you think it's going to be easier to be in those uncomfortable conversations with your partner if you're able to regulate your nervous system and notice how you're traveling rather than, erupting to a state of 100% anger right away? How could yoga support you in these different domains in your life? It's my suggestion that yoga will impact most domains. I am transparent that I'm totally biased here, but maybe there are other types of physical activity or mindfulness practices that work for you. Because what is yoga but moving mindfulness? For me, that works really well. I know the benefits of moving my body personally. That's something I experience in terms of how I show up, and maybe you do too. So how do we get it then into your schedule? And obviously one part of it is scheduling it. But I like to break this down further. So if you, let's say, want to do some yoga every day, we need to actually get you to be the person who does yoga every day. And that doesn't happen right off the bat. Big change in how we're showing up in our lives needs to start small. Because if we are relying on 100% motivation to do an activity, the moment our motivation is gone, we're not going to do the activity. And motivation is incredibly unreliable. Maybe after a talk like tonight, we might have more motivation to do something for a day, maybe two, but then it can very quickly wash away with all of the other challenges and responsibilities we have. So we need to start small. I bet you brush your teeth every single night, perhaps. And doing that isn't something that perhaps feels burdensome to you. It might just feel like a thing you do. You don't think twice about it because it's so routine in your day, and it's actually a really small amount of time. So it probably fits into your evening routine. I bet you have an evening routine, even if you're not conscious of it. Maybe it's that you brush your teeth and wash your face. Maybe you have a shower. Maybe you read, maybe you turn off the lights before or after you go to the bathroom. You'll have something that I imagine you do most nights. And if we want to bring yoga into your life, we need to link it to a routine that you already have, perhaps a morning routine, unless it's going to be a wind down evening ritual. And we need to make sure it's no more than a couple of minutes. Arguably, 10 minutes is like the golden zone that we're going to be going for, because 10 minutes of meditation produces the best dose response ratio in terms of the psychological benefits for the investment of time. And it's the same ratio with physical activity, with yoga. So if you're moving your body for 10 minutes, you're actually getting a host of benefits. And if you go longer in terms of physical activity, we do see further decreases in terms of mortality, which is what they often measure physical activity against. But 10 minutes gives a significant decrease. So if you're moving your body regularly, you're enhancing your psychological and physical health. But if we can link it to something you're already doing, it's going to become part of the thing that you do every day. And then it's going to be easier to do it over time. So in the morning, if you have a cup of coffee, could it be perhaps your intention to roll out your yoga mat? Maybe to inhale the arms up, exhale the arms down, and then to continue on with your day. And if you start doing that every morning, then maybe one morning you spend a little bit more time on your mat, and maybe a little bit more, and maybe a little bit more. But when it's not an onerous goal, I think you're going to show up to it more regularly. And as you show up, your motivation will actually increase. And remember, all of this is about practice, not perfection, both in terms of the physical moves that you might be making, but you may also miss a day. And this is to be human. Part of the experience of missing a day might be to make space for the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations that come with that. You know, thoughts around, oh, I'm a failure, I can't do it. Oh, I stuffed it up again. You see, I'm no good at this. If we can diffuse from those thoughts, if we can notice, name, and tame, and then reorientate back to rolling that mat out the next day, or if your choice activity is going for a walk around the block or sitting down to do formal meditation, could you notice, name, tame, and revisit that goal? So I hope that that's helpful in terms of troubleshooting some of the common challenges that show up here. We are going to lead into some time for questions. So I believe we have about 10 minutes to dive into some questions now. But if you would like to stay in contact, my details are up on the screen. So I am very happy to navigate future questions. You can always email me, but if you like talking about the mind-body connection, I do have a podcast, as Abby mentioned, Wisdom for Wellbeing, and of course the Yoga Brain 101 course that I'd love to see you inside if that aligns for you. Abby, do you have the questions up? Are you going to navigate? Yes.
I have a few questions. Dr. Kaitlin, thank you so much. That was such a fantastic presentation and so fascinating, and wonderful to have that beautiful combination of knowledge and wisdom from your the cultivation around yoga and coming from a psychology background. So thank you so much. As Dr. Kaitlin said, it's time for questions. If you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat box. I will also mention that the research that Dr. Kaitlin referenced has also been shared, so please feel free to download that. And we've had a few questions that have come through in regards to whether or not there will be a replay, because I know there's a lot of information, lots of little nuggets of gold to go back and kind of read through. So that'll be coming out in our post-event email in the next couple of days. But please feel free to pop those questions in the chat box. We actually have a few that our drop-in community on Facebook have sent through earlier this week. So I'm going to jump straight into those now, if you'll just bear with me. The first one that we had, Kaitlin, was whether psychological flexibility and resilience are the same thing.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. So often when we hear about resilience, and I think most of us have a bit of resilience essentially is. So the ability to cope with difficulties, challenges that come up in our lives, and to be okay in that, to kind of get through them. What's often missing is a way to cultivate resilience. And this is where psychological
now, I'm not sure if it's just me. I think we might have lost your sound there, Kaitlin.
My head.
I can hear a little.
And
there we go.
Know if that's working any better, or is that better?
Yeah, we can hear you better now. Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I'm not sure where the sound's coming from because everything's really quiet on my end, but I did get the question, so I'll answer it. So what I was saying is that Resilience is something that often we hear about, and most of us know instinctively what it means. To be resilient is to face challenges, difficulties that come up in our lives, and to get through them, like this sense that we can kind of move through with a fortitude. However, we don't often know how we build resilience or how to actually be resilient. And I think this is where psychological flexibility fits in. Psychological flexibility is very clear because we know if we can cultivate these 3 pillars of psychological flexibility, or break it down further into 6 psychological flexibility skills, then we're able to show up in what we might define as a resilient manner. So I do think they're the same. I think the benefit of the terming around psychological flexibility is that it actually provides us a path to resilience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think we hear the word resilience a lot at the moment. I know as a parent, it's comes up a lot around parenting as well, breeding resilience in children. We've had a question from Rachel who asked, for someone with anxiety, how long does it generally take to see the positive effects of yoga?
Yeah, so we see mood effects pretty immediately. So what that means is that if you do a yoga practice, it tends to be the case that you walk off the mat feeling, better in terms of like more positive elements of a mood state than before. In terms of anxiety, it really depends because there's 2 different pathways to anxiety. So one is the physiological experience of anxiety, which is that fight or flight, heart rate going, breathing going experience. And the other component of a lot of anxiety that we experience in this modern world is worry. So we start to worry about things. When we're moving, when we're breathing and using our body, very quickly we can start to turn off that fight or flight, or turn on the parasympathetic, might be another way of saying it. And if we're able to maintain our focus, it might give us some gaps in those worry thoughts, some breathing periods. However, cultivating the ability to practice present moment awareness and sort of those diffusion skills, the ability to notice, name, tame your experiences, including your worries, is something that's built up over time. So it does take a little while to see some of those transformations. And I think that pairs really well with psychological work and psychological skills. But pretty quickly, we can see the physiological changes.
Yeah, it's so exciting. And I think even just having those moments of reprieve can be, incredibly appreciated, in an anxious
Totally. We all just need some breathing space, don't we? Because we can carry these thoughts with us everywhere. Our mind kind of exists with us everywhere we go.
That's right. Everywhere we go, there we are.
Yeah.
We've had a question from Liz around how yoga strengthens the vagus nerve.
Yeah, so this is thought to be through the sort of movement of yoga. So it's like the contracting and releasing. There's been some really interesting research that's looked at the vagus nerve being stimulated for individuals who are experiencing chronic depression or other inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. And what they've done in those studies, this sounds wild, but they insert a magnet into the individual's neck near the vagus nerve. And then each day the individual will wave another magnet across their neck. So the magnets are essentially coming together as, and I don't want to say an artificial way of, strengthening the vagus nerve, but as sort of an assisted way. We can do the same thing in yoga with our movements. So that's the, proposed mechanism or the suggested pathway.
Wow, it is fascinating. Kelly's asked the question I'm sure lots of us can relate to: how do I bring back my wandering mind or thoughts during yoga or meditation?
Yeah, this is ever the question. And this is mindfulness. This is essentially why we practice mindfulness, is to practice coming back again and again. So whether it's an informal mindfulness practice, a formal mindfulness or meditation practice, or a moving meditation, moving mindfulness practice like yoga, the principle remains the same. It's a matter of practicing noticing where your mind is. You notice that your mind has wandered off to dinner or to that interaction you had with a coworker or your partner, and you notice it, and then you come back to noticing what's happening here now. your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations. Maybe if it's a more formal meditation practice, it might be a point that you're focused on. In yoga, it might be your breath and the movement. It's a matter of wandering off and coming back and wandering off and coming back. And over time, the periods that you're back start to lengthen. The wandering off might happen less regularly, or it might be for briefer periods of time, but that's all part of the process. So it's a practice of noticing where your mind goes and coming back so repeatedly for all of us.
And that is the practice, right? So we've had a question from someone earlier in the week around yoga, and I think it's still relevant tonight to ask, we've spoken about yoga at large, but if you're a complete novice, if you've never done it before, you're starting out, you can be quite overwhelmed by all the different types of yoga. Is there a particular type that is more beneficial? Where's the best place to get started?
Yeah, and this is so individual. I love this in a way because there are different types of yoga, which is super exciting. And I also get why that's super overwhelming. So what's most beneficial tends to be what you like most, because that's going to be something that you're more likely to do regularly and you enjoy. So if you're someone who's really physically active and you love something that's really dynamic and strong, then you might enjoy something called a vinyasa or a flow-based yoga or a hot yoga. So these are really dynamic, strong forms of yoga. If you're someone who prefers walking or couching or just taking things a little bit easier, then something that's more restorative in nature, or a yin yoga class, which is a slower type of yoga where you do longer holds, these might be the place to start. It's, I think, a matter in the beginning, if you're unsure what these things mean or what you like, to try a few different things and to know that one style of yoga, one teacher doesn't color everything else. Just like we might all have our favorite color or our favorite food, there's going to be different combinations and experiences out there, and we have to keep trying until we figure out, what our favorite item on the menu is.
I think that's great advice to leave us with, because unfortunately that went so quickly. I don't know about anyone else, but for me that went super quickly. We do have a few more questions that we haven't been able to get to, but if we haven't gotten to yours tonight, please rest assured that we will have those answers for you from Dr. Kaitlin in the coming days and weeks, and we'll share those within the drop-in community, because there were so many wonderful questions that did come through. Kaitlin, thank you so much for sharing your time, knowledge, and wisdom with us this evening. Incredibly generous and compassionate, and I've loved listening to you talk as well. I'd like to thank all of our wonderful attendees for coming tonight and for your questions. As I said, we'll answer them, if you haven't had them answered tonight, on the coming weeks on our Knowledge Hub, which is at dropbio.com, or in our Facebook group, which there's a link to below, and we'll have a few little bits and pieces and offers in there over the next day or two as well in that community. So definitely worth coming to check that out. There's a short survey at the link below also. If you have a few minutes to give us your feedback on tonight's event, it's truly helpful, and there's a chance to win a $50 gift card. We've put a link in the group chat box to join the waitlist for the Wellbeing by Drop product, which is launching on the 28th of February. So you can take the test and see how your habits are impacting your health. And then finally, as I mentioned, keep an eye out for that email with the event replay, which will include more info on Wellbeing by Drop and Kaitlin's very kind and exclusive offer for the Yoga Brain 101 course. But for tonight, that's it. Thank you again, Kaitlin. It's been so lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone for participating and being here.
And we'd love to have you back on the drop-in really soon. So thanks so much, and hopefully see you again soon.
It sounds wonderful. Have a good night, everyone.